We're joined now by IFA President Joe Healy. Joe, thanks very much for coming in to us. So Joe, a political agreement has been reached on the Mercosur deal. There are winners and losers. The big winners obviously being the car manufacturing industry in the EU, pharmaceutical sector, the machinery sector. The losers being the beef farmer of the EU. We're looking at 99,000 tonnes coming in from the Mercosur bloc: Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay. Farmers are shocked and infuriated by these developments. What's your initial response to what has happened to date, and when did you first find out about it?
I think, you said about farmers being shocked. They're angry. They feel let down by the EU politicians. Our phones and the office and our own personal phones haven't been as busy at any stage during my term as president, whether it was in the aftermath of Brexit, whether it was the weather crisis, the snows, downward pressure prices on cattle. This has been the busiest time and the biggest reaction that we've got from farmers on the ground. They feel that they've been sold out by the EU Commission. They point to it as being the height of hypocrisy from the EU Commission in the whole area of climate change, and also the promotion of double standards, the type of production that we're used to here in Ireland and across Europe, the extra costs that adds to your production line, and compare that then with the lack of traceability, the lack of animal welfare, the lack of regard for the rainforests in Brazil, for example. And even in the last few months, Bolsonaro, the Brazilian president or prime minister, and his government, they have authorised the use of an extra 150 pesticides in Brazil alone. So all the boxes that we're being asked and forced to tick at Irish and European level, the European politicians, particularly Commissioner Malmström, has ran off and, well, I won't say ran off because it's a while in the pipeline, but done a deal with countries that, show scant regard for those restrictions, or those, whether it's on the climate change or animal welfare.
Yes, farmers have been incredibly vocal on all those issues, but I suppose at the same time you have Commissioner Hogan coming out saying that there is safeguards and there is environmental measures and regulations and rules and terms and conditions, and all that is in there in the trade deal that will actually ensure that the beef produced in the Mercosur bloc will comply with EU regulations and EU standards, that it's going to be raised to that level over the number of years before it comes in. Is that good enough?
We don't accept that. You only have to think back to weak flesh, and you remember that well. It's in the last year and a half, and the European Food and Veterinary Office did a study and a report on what they were getting. The meat that was coming in was wrong. It wasn't safe, and their report gave a damning indictment of the Brazilian authorities. I know that there was one line in it that said that the competent authorities in Brazil were not in a position to guarantee the relevant export requirements for the beef. There was another line in it where they said that the guarantees that the European Veterinary Office was getting from Brazil were not reliable. So, where does Commissioner Hogan or indeed any of the other commissioners get the view that it has changed since, or it will change in the future?
So you wouldn't have faith in that the Mercosur bloc would comply with that?
We don't accept that the Brazilian authorities are either strict enough or give accurate information. And when you have, that's one thing we say in it, when you have the EU Food and Veterinary Office saying it, you'd wonder how a commissioner like Malmström, from a country like Sweden that's apparently so into climate change and animal welfare, etc., wanting to make sure that during her term and before next October, when her term finishes, that she would see this over the line and be left as part of her legacy.
Another issue that farmers are finding very difficult to wrap their heads around on this as well is the fact that you have Commissioner Hogan coming out in recent weeks talking about talking particularly to the suckler sector, saying about maybe reduce the numbers there and going into forestry more. And then I suppose we have this fund that is coming out, the €100 million fund to support beef farmers that have been affected by market disturbances. And then there's talks of how that could potentially cap production. So it almost seems from an EU perspective, they're trying to slow down production of beef farming from an EU side, but yet we're looking for 99,000 tonnes of beef to still be brought in. So that kind of flies in the face of what the EU are pushing on Irish farmers at the moment.
And you've raised a number of points there, Claire, and particularly around the 99,000 extra tonnes coming in. Some people might point to the fact, and Commissioner Hogan has said, that it's less than 1.25% of the European market. But when you take the uncertainty of Brexit, and I think any of us, if we're being honest with ourselves, we'd say that we're as clear this minute on where we're going to end up post-Brexit as we were the 23rd or 24th of June 3 years ago. If that deal goes wrong, if there's a no deal, if the UK are outside of the EU and not trading with the EU, there's the potential there for 1 million extra tonnes not to have a market. You put this 99,000 tonnes, that's an extra 10% on top of it. So I don't know where that market is going to be. People would say to us, it's time, to look beyond the UK. All Irish efforts in relation to the agri markets has been outside of the UK for the past 3 years. And the UK has just rolled along itself. And I think what's very telling is that last year, our agri-food exports to the UK went up by 2% from 35 to 37%, even though whether it was the Minister, the Department, Borbia, all the efforts were at looking at countries outside of the UK. So I think with the uncertainty around Brexit, it was reckless and it was wrong by the EU Commission to pursue this deal with Mercosur. And I think what's also worth pointing out is that this deal was being negotiated as an EU 28. We're going to be an EU 27. And instead of it being reduced from the 70,000 tonnes, we have seen her initial offer, which was made far too early in the negotiations, we've seen it actually increase to 99,000 tonnes. Now, Commissioner Hogan, and he'll be right when he'll say that the Mercosur countries wanted a lot more than 99,000 tonnes. He fought hard to keep it below the 100,000 tonnes, but for farmers, 1,000 tonnes would have been too much coming into a market that's already under pressure, that's already more than self-sufficient, and that looks likely that to be increased by 16% over the next couple of months maybe.
So, in the last few weeks we had the Taoiseach, we had the French President, the Polish and the Belgian Prime Ministers writing to the EU to raise their concerns on this deal. Since then, President Macron has actually said the French are happy enough with the demands of the Mercosur trade deal. The Taoiseach has said that the government are going to assess the potential impact of it. It looks like it's going to go ahead, and Ireland may not necessarily have a veto. So what's the IFA going to do to fight for farmers on this?
I think that in relation to what Commissioner or President Macron, I think he might have known. Maybe you say I'm a cynic now, but I think before he signed that letter stating that until Brazil would accept the Paris Agreement, that he wouldn't support it. I think that he probably knew that they would accept the Paris Agreement when he put his name to that letter. On the flip side of that letter, we got a letter last week when we were in Brussels, or the week before last, to meet Commissioner Malmström's head of cabinet. And we got a letter that day, and it was signed by Angela Merkel. It was signed by the leaders from the Netherlands, Sweden, Portugal, Spain, Latvia and the Czech Republic, urging President Juncker to see this deal through without delay. And you could look at different ways. You could look at Portugal and Spain. They have a close affinity with Brazil and Argentina. Angela Merkel wanted sales of cars. She wants to safeguard that. The Dutch guy, Rutte, might be looking at the ports there, an extra business coming through the Dutch ports. Sweden supported it because Commissioner Malmström is Swedish. So there were reasons. And I think from once you saw those countries, the writing was on the wall after that. There was a lot of support there for it. And
in terms
in
of
relation
what the
to the
IFA
veto,
are going to do.
Yeah, and in relation to the veto that you talk about, I think it's a majority, and that majority is broken down to 65% of the countries and 72% of the population, or vice versa, to get this over the line. That's all that's needed. But I think, we have written to the Taoiseach today requesting an urgent meeting this week, and we'll be asking him, you know, whatever about his impact analysis. The impact analysis may show, you know, the pharmaceuticals, for example, in Galway City, in Dublin City, Cork, Limerick, that it'll be positive for those, and that will probably outweigh the losses in the beef sector. But you're talking, if you want, you know, when we talk about a European Union, we talk about family farm model of agriculture, we talk about keeping rural areas alive, we talk about not having to spend an hour and 15 minutes in a car going from Athenry into a job in Galway. You know, and we're talking about having enough to be able to play 15 on the under 14 team. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about livelihoods. We're also talking about keeping a sector alive that underpinned this country when we were on our knees. When every other sector was losing jobs, moving out of the country, agriculture was the one constant. We're talking about a sector that has continued to increase its exports year on year, every year for the past 9 or 10 years. Last year we were at over 13 billion euro of agri-food and drink products from this country, going into 180 countries around the world. And we're talking about safeguarding the backbone of that sector, which is the beef and livestock sector, because they're carried on in parts of the country and on farms throughout the country and on lands throughout the country that aren't conducive to dairying or tillage or other work. And we're talking about families and livelihoods here. And, you know, the beef sector is the backbone of rural Ireland.
Joe, we'll leave it there. Thanks very much for coming in to us.